No food intro today. I might move it to the end of the video now that I think about it. But yeah, I just wanted to make this video because I wanted to rant a bit. I think I'm gonna put some random gameplay video on the screen here just to make it less awkward. Let me know if you don't like this. I'll scratch the idea probably or, continue it if there's a solid consensus. But very briefly, I'd like to thank everyone that watched my previous video on local LLMs versus Frontier. I really appreciate all the kind comments that I got, especially for a small creator like me. I have a lot of future videos planned on local LLMs, so stay tuned, I guess. Anyways, I've been on and off applying to software engineer roles over a good 3 years at this point, maybe, here in Japan. Both rare US remote jobs and also Japanese jobs through recruiters. That's just the kind of culture that's here. You get a job through a recruiter typically in Japan. I don't know why, but they love middlemen here for some reason. And yes, I apply while being employed. I think everyone should do this actually. And it's only recent that I've experienced some pretty bad interviews, especially for mid to senior roles. But yeah, I'm making this video to just talk about my observations from my own experience. Maybe you've had a better experience in the job market than I have, and I think that's great. But I'm finding consensus of the job market being bad from all the recent major tech influencers that I see reacting to like all these videos about, people losing their jobs in the tech market. But yeah, I would like to believe that all of us are just tired of the interview process at this point, and we're all here on YouTube just coping by watching videos like this. Obviously, AI has had some influence on the job market, but I really cannot fathom why companies just don't use common sense to hire. Usually it's the hiring managers that kind of turn off their brains, but more recently, I think even the engineers doing the hiring have also turned off their brains or something. But just for some background, I'm a software engineer with maybe 7 years of experience at this point. I mostly worked at startups my entire career, and I'm going to be 100% transparent and say that I am fortunate enough to be financially stable enough to not totally go homeless if I were to be unemployed. So money is truly a weapon because now I can push back on these companies that try to take advantage of you. Now, I'm not rich by any means, but I luckily have a habit of not spending that much, and I have enough to cover basic necessities for a very long time. I mean, I can make a whole separate video about how I planned my move to the low cost lifestyle here in Japan in another video if people are interested. But, anyways, I did grow up almost homeless as a kid back in the States, so I have a very small perspective on what it's like for those living on the edge as well. But I have been living in Japan since I started my tech career, and I have the ability to apply to both US remote and Japanese positions at the same time. The experiences I talk about in this video have a mix of US and Japanese companies. And if at any point in the video you think that I'm like totally delusional, or maybe you agree with my points, please feel free to let me know in the comments. I'm open to change if like the consensus of the comments are telling me that I'm just crazy or something. All right, starting off with the bad experiences. We have the absolute dog crap interview experiences that I had when I was a junior, which is as expected, but also ones recruiting for mid to senior as well. And in today's market where software engineers need to apply to quite literally like over 100 places to even get an interview, how are companies expecting interviewees to spend 6 or more hours on a take home test? I get it. Companies get like 1,000 applicants a day or whatever. But you know what? Companies also have a staff of tens or hundreds to work on these applications. Applicants only have themselves. Not only that, they have like tools to filter out resumes. So it's not even 1,000 applications in reality. So are these companies just expecting people to be available 24/7 of the day? Like some people need to work part-time to survive or, take care of their kids or like, just live life. It really sucks that this is totally one-sided, but companies know that a majority of applicants are just desperate for a job. It's incredibly repulsive to me that humans can treat humans like this. I know I'm getting like fired up and all, but yeah, I just woke up today and really got motivated to make a video like this. I'm gonna preface this with that Japan has incredibly unfair defamation laws. Companies here are super scummy and they're more self-conscious than your average teenage boy here. So I'll be trying my best to not mention like identifiable information, but at the same time, I don't want to be too vague. I'm not taking any chances here on getting sued. So while my worst experiences have been during my junior years, during my mid to senior years, there are also still pretty bad ones. But today we'll be talking about my recent mid to senior experience because that's what kind of spawned this video. My most recent one was totally strange. So the first interview was just a technical talk. It was with the lead architect and a backend engineer. By the way, this company is already IPO'd in Japan, I think. So there are expectations that they are at least organized. But yeah, their interview felt like it was going good during the whole time. A key question I asked them was, like what stood out for my resume. And these two guys told me that it was the CTO that looks at the resumes. He's the one that reviews it. So I would need to ask him if I wanted that answer. But yeah, I typically ask this question to not only gain insight on who they're looking for, but also to improve on my own resume to see if there's anything important that didn't stand out on my resume. Other questions I asked kind of probe how their leadership is because this is something my previous place did not have. And I found recently that this is actually important for the work environment. I mean, that's a topic for a whole nother video on its own, probably. But anyways, questions like what my day-to-day looks like, what projects are going on, what am I going to be doing specifically, and like what their development process is like, like all the standard questions. So the point is that I gathered enough info on the first interview to identify if the work will be interesting enough for me to actually want to work there. And before I continue, let me just remind people that I totally understand that I'm lucky enough to be in a position to be selective like this. I'm able to go into an interview with the goal of objectively analyzing if their requirements are fair or not, and also take a step back and just assess if the interviewer or interviewers are completely normal people because they are like a reflection of the company. But also at the same time, I believe that candidates should be treated like humans, not slaves. The work environment should be a safe business transaction of time and effort for money. But unfortunately, a lot of the times the environment does treat you like a slave though. So they gave me a take-home test after the first interview. It's a pre-made project where essentially it asks you to make a cache system for the API. And what a cache is results from an external API. So, that's fair enough. And I gave myself 1 hour to complete this as a mid to senior level engineer. Although I did went over a bit. I think it was like 20 minutes over when I timed myself. Anyways, I determined that the project was finished by running command that they wanted me to run in the README to get a specific result that validated that things were getting cached properly. Now, is this a fair amount of time to allocate, for like a mid to senior level problem? I think it is. Really, let me know in the comments here. Like, do you guys think it's fair for candidates to take 1 hour to complete a take-home test? Because here in Japan, I think you would need more than just one part-time job to survive. Your time is limited and you're already applying to other several jobs. So I don't think it's really fair to expect this type of person to give up 6 hours of their time to just have a shot at applying to the company, right? I think it's really criminal. But yeah, anyways, I figured that, 1 hour is enough because my previous internship at a very well-known company here in Japan also had a technical take-home test. And it was private gist submission that only takes maybe like 1 hour to complete. So I figured that this would be a good metric to go off of. And also just like other tests I've experienced are typically pretty short, maybe an hour and a half at most, I would say. And just a side note, I really hated when companies make you make a public repo to do their take-home test. Like it looks really bad if you do it on your main GitHub profile, especially if you're applying to places while being employed. And I don't think it's right to be expected to have a private, unassociated GitHub account to push to. Like this is already a red flag to me. Like they don't care about candidates, right? That's the feeling that I get. So starting from the beginning of the final interview, right? I went on a lot of tangents, but I just explained my first interview. I thought it went decently, and I had a take-home test and I completed it, right? And just to let everyone know, like most of the side notes that I say here in this video during like about the interview are typically my internal thoughts. Like I always remain professional in a professional setting. I also like to believe that I'm usually not this mean unless I've been wrong to begin with, like an eye for an eye. But anyways, just another reminder, like this is also a senior position, not a junior. So I do have different expectations coming into this. I would expect to be spoken to as if we both know what we're talking about during a senior position interview. But yeah, let me start off with the first red flag. Just for context, the calendar contents says nothing. It's just the names of the people that would be joining. Email says discuss take-home test solution. So, okay, I would have expected them to, read my code prior at least, or, have it in front of them just to point out high-level things, right? So when all 4 engineers were in the meeting, including the CTO, they first asked me to share my screen out of nowhere, and I was a little bit taken aback because usually I'm given like some kind of heads up if I'll be presenting or demoing, right? Like, isn't it common sense to like give a heads up to a presenter? Like, who would expect someone to be able to demo something without preparing beforehand, right? So that's a little bit of a red flag in my book, but I screen share anyways because at least I have some level of common sense. Like, what am I going to do? Like, say, oh no, I'm not going to screen share, right? So we go through the requirements of the take-home test. I start off saying with that, it's going to be a cached solution. And we have some conversation about details on the core requirements, and the core requirements are written on the readme, and like what other edge cases could happen and stuff. So I talk about expected request rate because I implemented a stampede guard for the API. This is because normal production apps do not get like an X amount of requests on a linear scale, right? You don't just like say, oh, we get like 50K requests a day. Like, you don't just divide 50K by 24 hours. Like request spikes happen during the day, and like, sometimes specific holidays, it might spike up, or specific events. You might get like, 5,000 requests in a minute. But anyways, the CTO says that like, quote, it sounds interesting. I didn't think of this. It's not important now, and we can talk about it later. And this is already like a pretty big red flag to me at this point, and I'm pretty like sussed out. Okay, so for one, like he didn't think about this because I think this is like a pretty standard thing to think about, and it is obviously an edge case when it comes to APIs, right? But yeah, they then asked me if I had read through any implicit requirements. I think that it's really strange that they were so fixated on this detail. So, but anyways, I respond with, yes. So I take them to a link and then show them a small detail on this external README that I happened to glance over while working on this take-home test. Yeah, so this small detail is like half of the solution to the specific edge case. The other half is implicit. You really gotta like look through the code usage to understand how to fully utilize the system, I guess. And I learned about this when the CTO asked me if I knew about X, and I was like, no. And then he tells me to go to the link on the original README and then scroll down, and then at the very bottom of the code example, I kind of already see what's like going on there. And at this point, I'm kind of thinking like, shouldn't this be like documented on the original README? Like, what are we trying to prove here, honestly? I explained for that the specific edge case that this CTO was so fixated on that my take home currently just returns a 503 after 3 retries, after it hits the certain condition. And he asked me why I went with this solution, and I just straight up said that I didn't get to this spec during the 1 hour I gave myself to complete the take home. I started by making the cache system work first, and then started working on the edge cases until my time was up, and that I properly tested the app before submitting. But yeah, the CTO then proceeds to say that he cannot determine whether I'm a good fit or not because I only gave myself 1 hour to do the task. So he kind of just assumes that any kind of response I'll give, it will just be like, oh, I only had 1 hour, which is not the case. During the entire interview, I did not once give the excuse that I only had 1 hour to do the task after explaining like the whole situation. But anyways, just a side note, I should have really give a different answer here, but I'm pretty honest here because I'm kind of selectively choosing what company I want to work at. So it's not going to be a good point for your average candidate, but I am currently taking my time. Anyways, I asked him if he wants to run my solution through any test cases that they prepared or anything. And then he just kind of repeats like, oh, you only had 1 hour to do the task. There's no point. There's no point if you only had 1 hour to do the task. So this really implies that he did not look through my solution before the meeting. Actually, all 4 of them did not look through the solution. It seems like they did not even click on my repo link that I gave them. So this not only shows that they did not respect the time that I gave to do their test, but this also means that the test has 0 meaning because I could have submitted 0 changes to the repo, just clone the repo and then upload it on my own repository, and they would have passed me onto the final interview regardless of what I did. Like, what are they even doing at this point? And they don't even care if the solution runs. I guess all they care about is if you can read implicit details, but they don't care if your work is actually detailed. So at this point, it's just like, they don't really respect my time and even their own time, because what are they even doing here then? It's like as if they'll just let anyone through. Anyways, I asked them some questions. They gave me some time for some questions for some reason. And yeah, I asked if they thought about how much time they expect candidates to work on the test. And the CTO then just replies, quote for quote, "That's a good question. We didn't think about that. I'll take that to the team. And sorry we wasted your time." And then I told him, no, I think it's fair if you expect candidates to spend more time on the test. I'm telling him to not be sorry. But he keeps repeatedly say to me that he's sorry, even though I've told him like at least 2 times to like not say sorry. It was a very strange interaction. Next, I asked him, why are there implied documentation? And why are all the requirements kind of obscured? And then he responds with, "We're not trying to give you trick questions. This is just how software engineering works." Like, brother, do you understand what a trick question means? And, fair is fair. Software engineering does work like this sometimes, but at the same time, this is not all there is to software engineering. Like, the entire process is pretty important, I would say. Like, really, who really cares about just one edge case for, like, a very simple interview? It's really strange. So next, I give him another chance to understand my implementation process. I have my dev environment up, everything is up and running. I think it's kind of fair to have expected them, to spend some time to check my code to determine that I'm a potential candidate, right? Like there must have been a reason why they scheduled this interview. So yeah, I ask if they want to go through my code still, but then the CTO just replies again with, "There's no point if you only spent 1 hour on the test," as if they thought I didn't write any code at all or something. And at this point, I just think that they're kind of scared to be caught that they didn't look through my code, because at this point, I feel like I'm the one that's interviewing them. So let's reverse the roles for a second, and let's just say that I have this candidate that made a solution for my test in 1 hour. And he says that it runs and is asking if we should run test cases to validate that the solution works. And he has his dev environment set up already, and it looks like he knows how to search through the code easily. What do you think is the reasonable thing to do here? Like, I've already spent my time, filtering candidates and getting this guy through all the interviews. Does this guy look like he's capable of writing code? If it were me, I would like probe more. He's obviously not a junior level developer. Like, this guy is already able to hold a conversation about edge cases and stuff. And we're hiring a senior after all. Like, we shouldn't really care about just one little edge case that he missed. And I also have 3 other engineers with me. 2 of them are lead architects for some reason, and 2 of them have already passed him through the first interview. So I think it would be a fair statement to say that we should maybe probe more or ask more questions about his process and everything, just to see if he's a good fit or not. But yeah, tell me in the comments, like, is this a fair assessment to make? Because I think it is. And while having the roles still reversed, fair is fair. The candidate did not meet expectations of reading the hidden documentation, and, the interview should be over. But, I think this kind of thought process is, in my opinion, is a process where you would never hire any exceptional candidates, because I've seen people that bombed interviews, but they're really talented. But yeah, this really shows me that the CTO is very closed-minded and really cannot look at the bigger picture. But yeah, back to my point of view. Like, am I the crazy one here? I then asked the CTO if he's looked at my resume, and he just straight up said, his two other engineers that interviewed me in the first round are the ones that look at the resumes. And at this point, I'm just like, what's going on? Right. And I have no idea what this fourth engineer is doing in the meeting. Like he has not spoken a word at all. But anyways, if you remember from what I said in the first interview, there are these two guys from the first interview that said that the CTO is the one that looks at the resumes. And I even probed them in the first interview, asking them in detail on why the CTO looks at the resumes, right? Because normally this is like left to the hiring managers or engineers. And they told me like that their CTO is just special and likes to be a part of that process. But okay. Now we have this like weird circular dependency error going on here in the second interview where, the CTO is saying like these guys looked at my resume, but then these guys are saying that, oh no, the CTO is looking at looked at my resume. Anyways, it feels like no one in this company knows what's even going on here, I guess. These guys are like pointing fingers at each other due to my question. And, the CTO then like kind of says that he only has like, 2 to 3 minutes to read resumes and then proceeds to like look at something, it looks like on his screen. And I can kind of see his eyes like darting side to side. And then he kind of just casually lists some generic stuff off my resume, essentially. So, okay, so the CTO didn't read my resume before passing me on to the final interview. And actually, I don't think he reviewed anything at all, right? Like, obviously, these two other guys in my initial interview did not read my resume. The fourth guy I have never met during this entire process. And, like, what is even going on here? And by the way, during the entire duration of the interview, these three other engineers aren't even talking. And I think that is the largest red flag to me. They look like they are too scared to talk against their CTO, which really tells you kind of like what's going on in their work environment. I was expecting like at least a comment or something about my code, but nope, not a single word. They said their name and title at the start and then never spoke once. All three guys. Like one guy looked like he wanted to talk at one point, but he clearly stopped himself. Like seriously, what are these guys even doing here? Not contributing anything at all. This is like just, wasting the company's time and money. And what is the CTO doing letting them do this? Anyways, I think you get the point. There are way too many red flags going on. I hold myself from asking more critical questions. I can grill them a lot more if I wanted to, but I just let the interview end there. So I really want to know in the comments, are my assessments fair? Like this is for a senior role after all. I think it's just a little bit strange to me that they want to just play this weird game of hyper focusing on a specific edge case rather than looking at the bigger picture. And if you guys like my assessment and thought process of this bad interview example, please apply anything you thought that was insightful to your next interview, as long as it's within reason. My hope is really for interviewees to gain a higher standard, like slowly but surely. Anyways, it was obvious that I didn't get this position, but funnily enough, I got the comment that the communication was not smooth. Okay, no one read my resume. No one other than the CTO was speaking at all. No one looked at my code. No one wanted to look at my code. And you're telling me that the communication was not smooth. Anyways, the recruiter told me that the past failed candidates had comments like, oh, relied on AI too much, or didn't seem like he knew what he was talking about. At least I got something out of this. That is where they kind of gave me a good indicator that they admitted that I did have some sort of senior level skill since, the job was for a senior level position. So this interview wasn't the worst I've had, but it was just a recent one, so that kind of motivated me to make this video. I've been watching a few laid off from tech videos on YouTube recently and just wanted to make my own where I'm critical about the state of the interview process, but also at the same time talk about the good interview processes I've experienced. This way, we can kind of compare like what is good and what is bad instead of just like, seeing what is bad. If companies really want to hire by quality, I think my stellar interview process examples could be a small hint to how should they proceed with that. Obviously, luck still is a large factor in finding a good candidate, but if you provide a slop test, you're gonna get slop candidates, honestly. But yeah, let's move on to the good experiences. I know I get kind of worked up when I'm talking about bad experiences. So while I've worked at 4 companies in total, only one of them had an exceptional interview process. And every other interview I've had, like out of all the failed ones, there is only really one exceptional one. So this brings us to a total of 2 exceptional interview process out of probably like, I don't know, over 200 interviews maybe. I'm not too sure. And when I say 200, I would consider like one company giving me like several technical interviews. This would be like a set, right? So it would be kind of considered as, one whole interview that represents the company's interview process. So this would be more like, over 200 companies that I've done technical interview processes with, probably. Anyways, my previous place had a pretty good interview process. Although it was only 2 sessions, it was like, 1 to 2 hour each. Actually, maybe more, I'm not too sure. They were really small startups, so obviously they had time to do this. However, I think the process can be compacted. But first, let's talk about my previous company's process. So the interview task boiled down to taking a ticket from the backlog and attempting to implement it live, like, screen sharing and everything. And, I was given a heads up, obviously, for this, so props to that. And it didn't matter if we finished or not. All they wanted to see is my dev environment, how I interact with the code using my environment, my thought process, the common sense route where you want to see the process, right? I think the process is more important than the goal, after all. But yeah, they asked a lot of questions about, like, what I thought these functions meant and what they do, stuff like that. Because actually I applied to this job without any experience in the language that they're asking for. So I was a Python dev initially, and I just jumped right straight into C sharp. So I had a lot of odds stacked against me during this interview because I had no idea about, the whole C sharp ecosystem and how it works and stuff. And also I was pretty junior at this point. Yeah, their whole process and like all the questions they asked me, I kind of reflected on this, and I think it does a few things. It checks to see how a candidate thinks while implementing code, and also how a candidate takes feedback while being exposed in their natural developing environment, and it gauges how much a candidate can do. Can they read the code? Can they infer from it? Can they easily search through the code base? Can they connect dots from the code to the ticket requirements? Like, how fast are they picking up things? Just all the things that you do in software engineering, right? Not just like a specific edge case. I'm sure there are a ton of other things you can infer by using this process. Unfortunately, this place had bad leadership and management. This really led to like scrapping a lot of already made code, no clear directions on features and stuff, and just a whole lot of other issues. But while I'm grateful they let me in initially, I really can't help but feel like I wasted a bit of my life during my time there. So the best interview process I've had is this next interview. And although more modern, I think this one was a pretty stellar process in my opinion. And it was a quick 1 hour interview. The contents was pretty much intro discussion, agentic workflow demo, and technical deep dive. So they did give me a heads up that I'm going to be screen sharing. Props to that. I think this is a pretty common sense thing to do, I would say. But yeah, yet again, I was able to show my dev environment and how I interact with it. This seems like a very common pattern for what I think good interview process is. There might be something to that. So why I gauge this as the best interview process is because using a coding harness the right way can paint a larger picture on how a software engineer thinks, breaks up tasks, and write code in general. And you can agree or disagree, but I just think that it's just in my opinion, I think that seeing proper usage can really show a lot of information. So anyways, during the live coding part, the interviewer merely gets a rundown on a project that I'm familiar with and then assigns me to create a feature for it. So for my project, it was like a Golang, I would say like a microservice project. And the interviewer just wanted me to implement a emailing system to it to support notifications or status updates. This scope might seem a little bit large, but I think having a coding harness means that it's actually a reasonable task. And, all the interviewer does is merely observe how I tackle this problem. But yeah, so I go through the usual plan and implement phases as I would with how I use coding harnesses. I walk through my idea on specific parts of the code and then write it down in bullet points for the plan. Like write down what service struct we need to build, the name of the file, which directory should be located in, and, adding new environment variables. I would just point out to the AI, like reference an example of how exactly we implement new environment variables. That way it doesn't stray away from our own conventions, and, where the services should get injected and all that stuff. Like just how you would instruct a junior dev if you had to write down instructions for them. So we iterate through the plan and implement cycle with, detailed prompts, and we eventually got it working and running in like, 20 minutes. I think if I just let the LLM rip, I would have failed the interview. Like at this email service, no mistakes. They seem to be looking for like this kind of detailed process when, they give coding harnesses to candidates. And this makes sense from my own point of view. You don't just, let the LLM run wild before pushing to prod, right? But yeah, as I said, I think this was a good process because like it really shows like the process of how you think when write a plan and modify the plan, and how you ask the LLM to implement stuff, right? That's all I really wanted to rant about today. It's been building up for over 3 years. A mix of experiencing US and Japanese companies, but mostly Japanese ones because I'm incredibly limited to rare remote jobs from the US. But yeah, I have more videos planned. I think I have stuff like, maybe my Git T set up instead of GitHub. A lot of my repos are, pretty much mirrored on GitHub. And I actually kind of have an unpopular opinion maybe about Golang, where I kind of like Golang's error handling. So, and as I said before in the beginning of the video, I do have like local LLM videos planned as well. But yeah, I think anyone that has watched this far, I would love feedback in the comments, so that I can improve. I know that I'm not like super coherent sometimes, and maybe my video formats are kind of boring. Yeah, I hope to build something for the community if I ever have the opportunity to grow one. Follow and interact with me on Twitter if you want to. I post random food from Japan sometimes, I guess. But yeah, all the links are in the description below.